Buckle up. Will Winter is back, and today we're going to talk to him about the A to Z of apple cider vinegar. We're going to talk about what it's good for.
And I learned something about vinegar by giving them to the pigs. It sounded like World War III in there. Those pigs were fighting over that vinegar, and it was just like they were in it. It was spilling it. It was gone. I went back, got another couple gallons, threw it in there, and finally the third time I was able to dilute it down with some water. The next morning, I'd say it looked like a spaghetti fight happened because the roundworms were all over that floor in that barn where they were being kept in the winter. That's another way we know it's a wormer. Like I say, we're learning as we go. The ironic thing about vinegar is the worse your forages are, the better it works. And we actually give the apple cider vinegar to the mama cows year round, 365 days a year. And what we have done by checking our old records, we're putting another 100 pounds of weaning weight on our calves than we used to get without the vinegar. Just that only change.
How to make sure you get the right stuff.
But he invented a technique called whole apple. Everybody else uses juice. And when I was a kid, we made cider. We had an apple press. We squeezed the juice out and drank that, or we fermented it and made vinegar. He realized there's much more medicine in the meat and the peel, the skin of the apple. Those people are making just out of juice were wasting all that medicine.
And much more on this episode 413 of the Working Cows podcast, brought to you by the Wineglass Ranch and K-Rose Company.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag studios, and always a pleasure to welcome Will Winter back on the podcast. And today we're going to talk to him about the A to Z of apple cider vinegar, or maybe the A to V of apple cider vinegar, as it were. And he's got a lot of great things to share about the benefits that he's seen in his own operation, or Thousand Hills there, where he is involved heavily, as well as other places that have put it into use and some of the benefits that they have seen over the year. We'll also talk to him about how to make sure you're getting it from the right source and other things. And I'll share that conversation with you right after this word from our sponsor today, the Wineglass Ranch. 1,400 head of Wineglass Ranch Easy Keepers are coming up for sale at Oglala Livestock Auction Market on Wednesday, March 26th. Wineglass's proven grazing genetics mean these cows will work for you, not the other way around. This sale will be a rare opportunity and a complete age dispersion of coming 5-year-olds to 9-year-olds. 1,000 of these will calve for 25 days starting mid-April, and 400 calve for 25 days starting in early May. If you want more information on getting your hands on the Wineglass Easy Keepers at Oglala Livestock Auction Market, Wednesday, March 26th, and across the Fruited Plain online, you can go to wineglassranchinc.com. Will, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows podcast. Welcome back.
Thank you, Clay. Yeah, we're making those cows work this winter.
Yep. Trying to keep them working. And I think that apple cider vinegar probably plays a role in that on some level. If I remember right, it plays a big role in just kind of a lot of different systems functioning well inside of a cow. Is that accurate?
That's really true. And it's also about profitability for the rancher too, or the farmer, or anybody with livestock. It doesn't have to be just cattle. We work with pigs, chickens, all poultry, sheep, of course, all other ruminants. And there's some magical things that I'll talk about with horses too. Unfortunately, our Amish and Mennonite customers won't be able to catch this podcast unless they find somebody that can replay it for them, which is too bad.
I will put it up. On.
Okay.
I've got a phone number they can call and listen to it.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I'll make sure it gets on there.
Good, because some of the best farmers in America are the plain people. and they make some of the best food that's out there. So, and they need all the help they can get because they don't have um, the electronic abilities that we've come to rely on now, like this show.
Yeah.
And I just feel sorry for them because everything happens in a little bit slower motion. It also protects them from a lot of other overload that we get from just too much stuff.
Which we've talked
But
about also.
but we don't mind explaining this to people. And the stuff that I'm doing with you today, I'm putting together in a written form, and I'm going to call it a apple cider vinegar syllabus, so that anybody wants to write me or Steve, we will give them free of charge a syllabus that contains the stuff that we're going to talk about how to use it and why they should use it and where to get it, the basics. And I would call today kind of the A to Z about ACV. That was my working title, A to Z, or maybe it should be A to V.
Right.
But let's start with why anybody would want to take this extra step in their day to do it, because I won't lie to you, it's not easy to give, especially getting started. However, once you get the knack of it, it will become easier. And when we get to the part about how to give it, I'm going to give people kind of like 50 ways, but the short answer is it doesn't matter as long as you get it in them on a regular basis, and we'll simplify that. Going back now, by the way, Steve Campbell and I and Roger Fairchild, the guy who makes the vinegar, we've taken this farther, in my opinion, than just about anybody else. There's nobody else talking about vinegar for animals to the extent that we are. And to my knowledge, no one has done as much research as we have done. You won't see research on anything good coming from universities or from the government, from Extension, because they're so married to the dollars that come from genetic research, AI, vaccine, big pharma. And this has nothing to do with that. This is old timer stuff made modern. In fact, I grew up in a little bit of a way with apple cider vinegar. And back in those days, we used Bragg's vinegar, which kind of doesn't exist anymore since Mr. and Mrs. Bragg died. The company's been taken over. And I'll say later, too, that Roger Fairchild was the man who made all the vinegar for Bragg's vinegar out in Fruitland, Idaho, for 30 years or so. So that was where that vinegar came from. He does not like the people who bought the company, so he's kind of a temperamental cowboy. So he just said he threw him out of his office. So he just didn't think that they were doing it right. So when I was a kid, my whole family are winter wheat farmers. Winter as in the two-season wheat, not in our name. But we grazed cattle on the winter wheat. We would harvest in Kansas, where I grew up, it was in the summer. It was in June, let's say. And that gave all of us boys time to get on the John Deeres and go around in circles and plow the land and plant the wheat. With us kids didn't get to plant or anything. We couldn't even drive the combine, but we drove the grain trucks. But so then all winter long, we had this beautiful, lush green grass that was the wheat. And everybody in a health food store knows the wheatgrass is probably one of the healthiest things you can put in your body. Wheatgrass can heal just about anything. And you can use oats or rye or barley, any of the small grains, make a good wheat. But this unusual plant that caused us Germans to migrate from Germany to Kansas was because we knew how to make this wheat, this winter wheat, this Russian winter wheat. And none of the people in that area knew that before us moving to Kansas. And that was the good news. It's an incredible grazing for cattle. The bad news is that it's very bloaty. And all of us kids knew if we drove by or walked by a pasture and we saw a steer down on his side, big old belly pooched up, we had to run, get a pop bottle full of apple cider vinegar
Mm.
and glug it down their gullet. And if we got there before they were dead, we weren't able to raise the dead. But if we got there before they were dead, we could save every bloated heifer, steer, calf, stocker, cow. It worked every single time. And within 20 or 30 minutes, they'd be burping and be up on their feet. And within an hour, they'd be grazing again. It worked every time. That was the only thing that we knew. And what's funny about getting a degree from Kansas State University in livestock nutrition, that the words apple cider vinegar, I don't think it came up one time in that whole education. And it certainly didn't when I went to vet school at Kansas State. We didn't learn anything about it. So this background that I had in it kind of went away. And we had drugs for bloat, Rumensin and various other things. And you can't make any money on vinegar, so they taught us how to give drugs for mostly for curing bloat, but also for trying to prevent bloat with pharmacy. And then I got out of school, and then my education, like for most people, started once you get into the real world, because universities teach you about theory and what's true in the not in the real world. It's in the theoretical world. So in the real world, for me, it started with my job as the veterinarian for Thousand Hills Cattle Company. And in addition to the 60 or so producers that we have that raise and finish 100% grass-fed cattle for us, which we buy when they're finished, when they're hit 1,100, 1,200 pounds, we want them to grade high select or low choice. We have our own stocker herd and we have a cow-calf herd. And I liked giving the vinegar, but this is going back 15, 20. I worked there 22 years, so going way back, we started giving the vinegar because it's such a good health tonic for them. It's a warmer. So we moved our stocker herd to the south shore of Lake Superior in northern Wisconsin for the winter, where they're just put up. They're not grazing, obviously, in the winter in North Minnesota where we live. And we were giving the vinegar to them. And the herdsman up there, the guy who was taking care of them, called us up. Todd Churchill was the owner at the time. Said, Todd, I think your cows are sick. He said, why? And he said, well, I always put 5 bales of hay out there every time I fill the bunks. And now they only eat 4 bales. I put out 4 bales, and that's all they want. And we said, well, are they getting skinny? Are they losing weight? No, that's the funny thing. They're fat little butterballs. And we were scratching our heads like, what? Huh? This doesn't make any sense at all. But that was my first glimmer of the fact that when you give cattle apple cider vinegar, it will cut your feed bill by 20 to as high as 30%. We had a farmer last week called Steve Campbell and said, oh, I ran out of vinegar and our hay bill shot up 30%. Well, guess what? That's why we give it now. We give apple cider vinegar because it enables the cattle or any ruminant to digest grass better.
Do you have a sense of what's going on there? What makes that?
Yeah, we know exactly we know a lot about what's going on. And like I say, this is coming from Steve and I almost exclusively. I've never read any of this anywhere, but I did read that it stimulates the cellulosic bacteria in the rumen. And cellulosic bacteria eat cellulose. Another word for cellulose is what? Wood. Cellulose is wood. We could eat wood, but we can't digest it. Pigs, chickens, they could eat wood. They can't digest it, but any ruminant can digest wood if they have a healthy rumen. And when the vinegar stimulates the cellulose bacteria, they break down this cellulose. So in chemistry, any word that ends in OSE, as in cellulose, is actually a sugar. And but you can't get it. You can't break it. It's this long chain sugar. You can't break it down into glucose or sucrose, but they can do that. And the way we tell this, and this is one of the first things I look at when I go to a ranch or a farm, is I look at the manure of the animals. And if they're on vinegar, it looks like pudding. It looks like, I call it pumpkin pie filling. That's probably very bad for our taste buds to think of it that way. But that's the kind of patty I want to see. And when I worked with Jerry Bernetti, who's the late Jerry Bernetti, he and I used to compete as like who could get the picture of the best cow patty, and that she could digest. And when we see that smooth texture, we know she can digest. And if those patties, if you go out there and they're all stacked up like horse manure, that ain't good. That means you got some poor doing animals that can't digest.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, the K-Rose Company. Looking to make your next bull sale a bigger success? K-Rose Company has been helping ranchers like you grow their business for years with cutting-edge marketing strategies that get results. They understand your work, and they're here to help you maximize your potential. Their bull sale marketing guide is packed with actionable tips and proven tactics to elevate your marketing efforts and boost your sales. Don't miss out on this free resource. Visit workingcows.net/413 and download your copy today. K-Rose Company, your partner in ranching success.
Pretty much I ask every cowman, what do you think is the most common limiting factor in raising cattle or sheep or goats? What's the most common factor? Actually, for pigs or chickens too, dairy cattle, and they'll say protein, because they're buying protein blocks and cubes and tubs. And, hey, it ain't protein. There's very few places in the United States where protein is the problem. It's energy. And there's two main sources of energy. A lot of this I'm just going over because you know most of this, but grass has sugar for energy, and grain has starch. That's a storage energy that grains have for when they eventually sprout. They use that starch. So you're either burning sugar or starch. Now, sugar makes omega-3 fatty acid primarily, which is the anti-inflammatory fat that everybody needs to keep their body from being on fire. And if you look at health doctors, they'll tell you Americans are on fire. Their guts are on fire with colitis and Crohn's disease, IBD. Their skin's on fire with psoriasis and various skin things. Their brain is on fire with ADHD and seizures and all kinds of things. Their joints are on fire. So that is from too much omega-6 in the diet. And this is our talking point for why we go through the hell it takes to raise grass-fed beef, is that our beef will have a ratio of 1-to-1, omega-3 to omega-6. And the average American diet, 20-to-1, 20 times more omega-3 inflammatory fat. So that's why we want to digest that sugar. And I'm really proud to be working with some grass milk dairy farmers that are raising grass milk primarily to Maple Hill Creamery in New York, upstate New York. I work with a lot of Mennonites up there, and they're raising grass milk, and that's a challenge. There's big rewards, though, because those guys typically only need to milk once a day because the production allows that, the volume of pounds of milk per cow per day. So there's the main advantage, though, is the pH of the body is more normal. The acidosis is maybe the top, but it's one of the three killers of dairy cows. Dairy cows die of three things. They die of funny protein, which is the non-protein nitrogen, NPN, that's in a lot of forages. They die of mold intoxication. Nobody talks about mold. I wrote an article for I think it was for Stockman Grass Farmer about mold, and everybody's like, oh, that's boring. Because they don't want to talk about mold, but it's terrible. And we have a lot of different kinds of molds, and we'll get to this later, but vinegar also neutralizes mold mycotoxins, poisons. And some of these molds are what Jerry Benetti always called stealth molds, because they don't kill you dead like some of the mycotoxins from Aspergillus flavus, which you get that toxin, you're alive 1 second and you're dead the next. Whereas with the stealth molds, which is ubiquitous. And GMO grains are terrible for mold.
Mm.
You probably know this, but they don't have a lot of mold resistance. So this fusarium mold is Jerry called it the Midwest mold, but it's very common in GMO grains. And when you get enough of that mold in you, you lose your immune system. You basically have AIDS. You have acquired immunological deficit. So you get mastitis, you get foot rot, you get pink eye. You can't you just get everything. And the vet is just jamming them full of antibiotics and steroids and everything else. But those animals don't have an immune system. And as you know, the immune system is everything. So that's a big part of it.
So is that when you're talking about having to milk once a day, is that a lower volume, higher quality milk then? Is that how that ends up working out?
Very well said. You have a way with words. That's exactly what it is. That milk is delicious. It's just like drinking a vanilla milkshake.
But that's,
So
I mean, Kit Farrow's told everybody for a long time that their cows make too much milk, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
there's a few things. I love Kit. He's a really great guy. He's brilliant. He's really smart. But there's a few things he and I don't get along with, or we've come over a lot of that. And Kit used to not give minerals. He was telling everybody the way he would word it is, we don't pamper our cows, and that just struck me wrong. It's like I love cows. It's like, let's pamper them. Why not? And I know what he's talking about you can go overboard on anything, but nobody that I know pampers their cows to excess. But I challenged him on the minerals. I said, well, Kit, what's essential for cows? How about air? Do they need air? Well, yeah, duh. Of course they need air. I said, well, okay. Do they need water? Yeah, that water is essential. They have to. And I said, okay, how about minerals? Do they need minerals? And it was just crickets. He says, oh, you got me, I think, on that one. So Kit is a big advocate of giving minerals. And you know this, that they're not in the soil. They never were. And that's why the buffalo and the elk and a lot of animals migrate to mineral licks and salt licks, because God never put it all in one spot. And even if God had, it's long gone. When you take 100 calf crops off of a pasture, they're not left. So you need to do that. And this fits in with our vinegar talk, because the vinegar works enzymatically, it works with enzymes, and enzymes run on minerals. And that's true for the whole body. So we need all these, there's 21 essential minerals. Essential means you don't have one of those, you die. You can't live without them. So we have to give them the option to get it. We can't migrate them to the mineral licks, so we bring the minerals to the farm. But the other thing I wanted to talk about why vinegar works, and this comes out of the University of Wisconsin. They did some studies. They invented a new type of corn. It's a soft corn. It's what they call a floury endosperm corn, FLOUR. Like you can almost take your finger and thumb and pinch it, unlike hard dent flint corn. And they're really proud of this new kind of corn, and they should be. It's great. But on their website for University of Wisconsin, they put acetic acid, which is the main component of apple cider vinegar, on that corn, and then they blew it up on an electron microscope and looked at it. And in the endosperm of any grain, there's two things. There's protein and starch. And the protein looks under the microscope like peanut butter. It's just this matrix. And the starch looks like little ping pong balls in it. So they poured the acetic acid on it, and the prolamines, the protein, went away, and it released these balls of starch. So that's how we know for pigs and chickens that eat grain, that vinegar will help them digest the grain. They'll get more mileage out of it. And I'm a hobby raiser of pigs, and my pigs, they get vinegar every day. And I learned something about vinegar by giving them to the pigs. I put out a Rubbermaid tub about 6 inches tall, and I put a couple of gallons of vinegar in there, and I went to go get the garden hose. Well, it sounded like World War III in there. Those pigs were fighting over that vinegar, and it was just like they were in it. It was spilling it. It was gone. So I went back, got another couple gallons, threw it in there, and finally the third time I was able to dilute it down with some water. The next morning, I'd say it looked like a spaghetti fight happened because the roundworms were all over that floor in that barn where they were being kept in the winter. And it was amazing. So we know that's another way. We know it's a wormer. Like I say, we're learning as we go. This is unbelievable what we have learned about why we give this vinegar. And so again, the number one limiting factor in livestock production, always energy. What happens when you have a drought? Uh-oh, you have no energy. And we're fighting drought now in at least 5 states. And a lot of our producers at Thousand Hills are in the droughty states like Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, a couple other states. And it goes back and forth. We're in a mild drought here in Minnesota. So when there's a drought, you can either you fight your way through it or destock. And well, a lot of our cattle in our stocker herd comes because we're destocking a lot of these ranches and farms in the drought area. But in a drought, that's when you need the vinegar. I also had an experiment with some friends of mine inherited some money and they bought the land right next to them, which was worn out old corn and bean ground in Wisconsin. And that's terrible. It's not as bad as Will Harris faces down in Georgia, where he's dealing with cotton, peanuts. Peanuts is probably the most damaged of all soils. So those crops down there, tobacco is another one that takes everything out of the soil. And so we're in the process of rebuilding this Wisconsin farm. And the first year I put out a seed cocktail that I thought would work. We put out a biological stimulant to eat the glyphosate and get the poisons out of this new land that's coming out of 100 years of corn and bean rotation and terrible everything. Well, the first year we could not even grow a weed on it. And so what little scruggly things came up, I just had them take a sickle bar mower and mow it down. The next year, we had some rain in the spring and we had weeds 6 feet tall. I mean, it was a jungle. They were the pigweed and, it was like thistles and cuckleburs and junkweed. And I got out my refractometer and the highest bricks I ever got, I found one weed that had a bricks of 4. Everything else was at 2 or 3, which is a total nothing burger. You could eat that all day long and you'd lose weight on that because there's no energy in it. The bricks index is your nutrient density. It's the amount of nutrition that's in the plant. And we bricks everything. And we try to achieve a bricks at 12 for grass-fed beef production. If you can't hit bricks of 12, you're never going to be able to finish cattle in time for them to be tender and delicious. You're going to have these 4-year-olds wandering around that'll grade, that they won't even grade choice or select because they can't put on fat. Well, in this particular instance, there was no one around to take care of this property, but I didn't want to plow down all these weeds again or cut them down. I wanted to run it through a rumen to get that alchemy that you can do to build soil with livestock. So we ended up buying about 43 head of cattle that were junkers. They were sale barn quality. In fact, an old man raised them as a hobby for sale barn sales. So we just walked them down about a half mile down the road and threw them in there. You couldn't even find them. You could just see the weeds wiggling. And the only thing they got minerals, which they were deficient in. He had never given them anything. He might have had one weight salt block. So they ate several bags of minerals because they were so deficient. But I had a Rubbermaid tub and I put in 4 ounces of vinegar for every head. So that's about 1.3 gallons per day. And filled it up with water, and every night it was empty. I don't know who got it. Maybe some of the piggy ones got it more, the boss cows. But anyway, they kept eating. Well, I put them in right around the 4th of July. This was a couple of years ago. And then we had a long grazing season for northern Wisconsin. We got them. We went clear to mid-November. We were able to sell them as grass-fed. They were grinders. They were not top quality because they were mutts. They were there was continental breeds, some dairy blood in them. They were not the kind that we like, but they sure made good ground. And we made so much meat on them. And those cattle, those scrubs, had gained right at 4 pounds per head per day. Nobody gets 4 pounds in general. That is incredible. And this is on 3 bricks weeds with rotten cattle. So that was my learning experience. The reason I'm telling this story is that if you have quality livestock like Gabe Brown or any of those guys, and if you have 12 bricks calves, you can't not make money. They're going to gain on you. They're going to be so efficient. They're going to make the soil better. Everything's great. This was not only bad cattle, but it was bad cattle and bad forage, and we made a ton of money. Anybody can duplicate those results, and so that was crazy. So then, Thousand Hills has 2 in-house herds. One is a herd of stockers, and those we buy when we go around to drought areas. We pick up the 5 weights, 4 weights that they just can't afford to feed anymore. And we keep about 120 to 150 head on hand to fill in short orders. When somebody comes up short, they don't bring their full slot. We get punished at the meat plant, so we'll pull some out of that herd. I don't experiment on other people's animals. I always only experiment on my own or where I work. And we give those stockers as much apple cider vinegar as they want. And it's free choice. And in the summer, we put it in the water too. We will put 1 to 128. So a gallon of vinegar in every 128 gallons of water. And when they come in, that's too high for maintenance. You don't need that much. You can do 1 to 256 for if you're not dealing with drought or stress, or weather stress, cold weather, things like that. We'll go 1 to 256.
And that ratio just works out to, on the high end, 1 ounce per gallon or a half an ounce per gallon. Yeah. That's the same ratio.
Yeah, that's exactly right for the math. Ounce per gallon for smaller operations. And then we put a dosatron meter on the water line. And the Amish love this because there's no power involved. The water flow just puts the vinegar right into the water. Now, we can't do that here in Minnesota in the summer. So what we do, we take 5 bags of C90 sea salt in a tote of vinegar, 275 gallons of vinegar. So it's about a pound of salt per gallon of vinegar. Stir it up a little bit with a mixer, and that will stay in solution, and it will not freeze. Yeah, I don't know how cold you could get, but it won't freeze. That's the problem where I live, northern latitudes. We can't serve the vinegar if it's frozen. And it's just, again, we're trying to make this as easy as possible. But those steers are on local hay. It's all they get, local hay, which it happens to not be very good in this part of Minnesota. It's about like reed canary grass. And it's a lot of it is on federal land, so you can't improve federal land very much. So it's low bricks, low energy. We are able to achieve 3 pounds of gain per day per steer in the winter. And here in Minnesota, unless you're given molasses or grain or some kind of energy, you're going to go maybe backwards. You might gain 1 pound a day, but these steers gain in the winter on just nothing but poor grass and minerals and the vinegar. So those are just some of the ways that we can give it. So again, with us, those are the easiest ways to give it. Steve Campbell even figured out something better. When he cuts his hay, when it's windrowed, he runs up and down the windrow with a 4-wheeler with a spray nozzle and just sprays it on the windrow. And we're trying to get at least 3 gallons per ton of dry hay, 3 gallons. And you can go more than that. North Star Bison up in northern Wisconsin is using it successfully for their grass-fed bison, and they've trained all their hay jockeys. They're a big operation. I think they told me a couple of years ago they were buying 2,800 tons of hay a year, and I think it's more than that now because they're banging out probably 3,000 animals a year. 100% grass-fed. So the hay doctors have figured it out that they like that. They just wash out the hay conditioner unit on the front of the baler because this is more corrosive than propyrenic acid, which is the cousin of acetic acid. But it's dead. Prop is just a test tube chemical. It doesn't have any biological life in it. And this is, again, something Steve has found out, Steve Campbell, is that there's three things that make vinegar work. One is the acetic acid, which actually, due to the molarity, alkalizes your body. And this is true for me, you, everybody's listening to this podcast. You do not want to be acidic in your blood pH, your body pH, because that's cancer territory and diabetes and chronic degenerative disease. So you're trying to do everything you can to alkalize your body. Vinegar is such a low molarity acid that it actually creates an alkaline state in your body. And for us at Thousand Hills with grass-fed beef, when our cattle are alkalized, they don't get listeria, they don't get anaplasmosis, they don't get brucellosis, they don't get pink eye, they don't get infections because they're so alkaline. And a big part of that is we're not feeding grain. And that's why dairy cattle die, because they're so acidic. Grain digests in a way that makes you acid. For us, the other thing that makes people acid is when they eat sugar. Sugar and carbohydrates, which is the American diet basically, makes you too acid in your pH. So you're trying to alkalize your body, and vegetables do help you get alkaline, as does grass-fed meat, milk, and eggs. So that's, again, these are broader pictures that we knew. We just didn't know why we're bothering to give cattle to vinegar. I wanted to say it before I forget it too. And again, this is for people that have horses. I have proven over the last 20 years of full-time practice that a horse that gets vinegar every day will not colic, founder, or bloat. And that is major bad news for veterinarians. I always joke the three biggest parasites on the farm are government people, bankers, and veterinarians. And I used to tell people I was working on a spray to get those serious parasites off of the farm. So anyway,
well, if you have apple cider vinegar around, you'll have less of a couple of those, maybe, anyways, huh?
Well, all of those. And the other thing is, horses are, they don't call them hay burners for nothing. They do not have a rumen. They just have a hind gut. So you look at horse manure, half of the food value is still in the manure because they're poor digesters. And that's why they're begging for grain all the time and sugar cubes because they're not as good at digesters as a ruminant. So therefore, we can cut their hay bill way, way, way down. Get the manure looking good. And like I say, I look at that manure when I go on a farm. I want to see and I encourage people, they think I'm kind of nuts. I'll say, send me some pictures of the manure pats. And they're like, what? So yeah, I want to know what we're starting with, where the digestion is, especially if they're going broke, if they're not making any money. That's what I want to see, if they're getting their money's worth out of their forages. The ironic thing about vinegar is the worse your forages are, the better it works. And because you want that stemmy, woody stuff to break it down when nobody else can break it down. Anybody can take, I don't know, high quality dairy hay or alfalfa or something like that, and their cattle will do pretty good on it because it's easy to break down and digest. The other thing that comes out of University of Pennsylvania, the other dairy state, they figured out that apple cider vinegar or even acetic acid stimulates the production of butterfat. And when dairy farmers sell their milk, which they all have to do, the percent of butterfat determines how much money they make. You can water down milk and you might have twice as much volume if you put water in it. They don't care. They're going to look at the components, how much protein's in it, how much butterfat is in it. The process that I was describing, and we can do that through ruminology. will tell you how we make butterfat in the rumen. Well, the equivalent of butterfat in my world, which is grass-fed beef, is intermuscular fat.
Mm-hmm.
So we can lay down more intermuscular fat when we give vinegar. We can get them to town more quickly. And we have our rock star performer is in upstate New York. He has Murray Grey cattle, and he sends cattle to town at 16 months on a regular basis, at the most 18 months, which means he'll make, you might say, twice as much money as the guy has taken 30 months to get his cattle finished. That's incredible.
Well, and that's where I was going with that question earlier about lower volume, higher quality milk, and even the connection to Kit Farrow was that what we're looking for is that animal that produces that high butterfat milk, because it takes less of it for the calf to thrive then. And so if apple cider vinegar is another way that you can increase the ability to create that high butterfat milk, she's going to be able to raise that calf on less again, right?
Mm-hmm. And we actually give the apple cider vinegar to the mama cows year round, 365 days a year. And what we have done by checking our old records, we're putting another 100 pounds of weaning weight on our calves than we used to get without the vinegar. Just the only change, extra 100 pounds of calf weight. And now we're not, we don't short wean anything. We wean at 300 days, and we can justify that to anybody that's short weaning, because those calves are the ones that you want to keep. Those are the ones that work. And Steve has found this out. Actually, a lot of it came again out of University of Pennsylvania. They were going to see what kind of milk replacer was going to make dairy calves more productive when they're adults. And so they tested every kind of, it's mostly soybean juice, most of the milk replacers, but there's dehydrated milk. You can feed high somatic cell count milk. You can feed all this. Well, they found that, and they cut these calves open. They saw them at 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16, up to 32 weeks. And they found there's one thing that develops a powerful rumen. And those microphotographs are online too, University of Pennsylvania. And the healthy rumen has long villi. It looks like shag carpet. It's dark brown because it's got blood supply. Some of the calves are getting a terrible milk replacer. Their rumen lining looks like sandpaper, tiny little papillae, no blood supply. Those are your high expense. When they go on the line, they're going to be very expensive because they're poor digesters. They don't have a good rumen. So all these people are doing grass-fed beef, grass milk, or they just want to make money. It pays to put money in that calf. Put money in that calf that you're going to keep, especially your replacement heifers. That's where you notice it the most, because you're going to have them longer than you are stockers. So this is, again, it's just, we're seeing this extra 100 pounds. These mama cows have a baby inside, and that baby's fine. She doesn't milk down because she's getting that energy. She's getting the digestion. She's making more milk. I think Kit's right. You could go excessively with milk production, but we're not culling against cows that have a big bag or that do good, because those calves, oh my God, are those good calves. Steve is out there oohing and awing over them. And we have Steve Cabell come out usually every 2 years at Thousand Hills. And if you have Steve come out to look at your herd, he's a bovine geneticist, probably the best certainly in the United States. He always brings a box of Kleenex because you may not like what he says. But he'll have the bell-shaped curve. There'll be 10 or 20% rock stars, 10 or 20% that you need to move down the road, and then the middle doers. But if you call your herd according to Steve's principles of linear measurement and the other things he looks for, you can go to town a lot quicker. You can get to the goal line much more rapidly than just various other criteria. So that's the other thing. So the next thing on the list was, I mentioned how to give it. There's 3 basic ways. You can put it in the water. You can put it on the feed, top dress it. My sheep and goats, I just top dress round bales. If I've got 100 sheep or goats, they get about a half an ounce a day, so that's 50 ounces. I might do 3 days in a row. That's 150 ounces, about a gallon and a third. And I'll go out there and they see that bucket coming, and they're, especially the goats. And goats are terrible hay wasters. They poop in it, pee in it, scatter it. I don't know what they do with it, but they won't waste that vinegar hay. They love it. It's like salad dressing for them. They're out there with the tweezers and the magnifying glass getting all of it. So I just pitch it on there, just make sure it doesn't go on the ground, just that it stays in the round bale. And they pick it over. They love it. So for me, that's the easiest way to give it to them in the winter. In the summer, I put it on in the water. So we can fine tune every farm operation to help them when they buy the vinegar. Then we'll say, how are you going to give it? Well, I don't know. Well, let's go over your place. What do you have, water lines? Yeah. Do you have central area? Yeah. Well, let's put it in the water, And if you live in Georgia or Missouri or somewhere, you can easily do that year round.
Sure.
I don't know, this year, maybe not in Missouri, but we have plenty of easy options to get that extra benefit. So then the other thing that is essential to talk about is, well, what kind of vinegar do I get? And I know this from having not experimented, but I didn't know that there was such a huge difference between the whole apple that Steve is affiliated with. He doesn't even make it. He just knows Roger Fairchild. They live about 3 miles apart around Fruitland, Idaho. So Steve got acquainted with Roger Fairchild, this vinegar guru, who's made it for over 30 years, and he makes 6 or 7 million gallons a year. But he invented a technique called whole apple, and everybody else uses juice. And when I was a kid, we made cider. We just squeezed, we had an apple press, we squeezed the juice out and drank that, or we fermented it and made vinegar. He realized there's much more medicine in the meat and the peel, the skin of the apple. And those people are making just out of juice were wasting all that medicine. That's where all the powerful stuff is. And there's a coating on the outside of the apple of microbes that are very important to get. So there's only 3 main companies that make apple cider vinegar in quantity. Flashman's out east. There's one in California. Name's escaping me now. And then there's Golden Valley, which is Roger Fairchild's company in Fruitland, Idaho. So in the Midwest, we're not apple country. Neither is the East Coast. Apples love cold, dry nights. And if they don't have that, they'll get mold. They tend to get blight or mold. And so it's very difficult to raise organic apples in the East Coast. So Washington, Oregon, that's where all the good apples come from. And Roger doesn't use ground falls. He doesn't use the top quality. There might have a blemish on them, and that's what goes into this. But they're real apples. He grinds it all up in this patented way. And that's why it has 3 things. It has the acetic acid at 6%, which is called 60 grain. There's a lot of confusion about that. It also has all these living enzymes that are extremely powerful. They're actually more powerful than probably the acetic acid. And then it's loaded with biology. It's loaded with microbes, are the same ones that run our belly, run our gut, run the livestock's gut. So you're replenishing these digestive microbes in there every time they drink a drink of vinegar. But if it's made from juice, or even worse, a lot of the East Coast vinegars, they use concentrate juice, which means it's been boiled, which means it's killed, it's dead. So they have to throw in a few more microbes. They don't have any enzymes. So my experience with it is it takes 2 or 3 times as much of the other vinegars, which might sell for, I don't know, maybe $1 a gallon less or something like that, but you pay for it because you're going to use twice as much. And I've had people actually return those vinegars. Rogers, you can see, I think you can see this bottle, how dark it is. This is what he's selling now for us to consume, Fairchild's apple cider vinegar. This is the same thing that cattle get. It has the sediment, which a lot of people call the mother. And that's another area of complication or confusion. People always say to Steve and I, well, does yours have the mother? And we call it the mother of all vinegar, but we're kind of joking because when they throw this stuff in here, this is actually dead yeast bodies. This isn't mother. Mother is up here, it floats.
Right.
And if you've ever made kombucha, you know that because your SCOBY is this gigantic blob of gelatinous, scary looking material. But that's the mother, and that is in all fermented vinegars. There's two kinds of vinegars. There's fermented and there's distilled vinegar. And distilled is what you don't want. That's test tube vinegar.
Mm-hmm.
And that will, all vinegars will work, but how much they work, not much. So we want to get 60 grain. And the reason we say 60 grain, that's when the fermentation quits. If it gets above 60 grain, it inactivates the microbial action. But you can get it up to 60. That's fantastic, where they're converting the sugar to cider, and then the cider is converted to alcohol. And I'm sorry, and then it goes to cider. And if you've ever had a nice bottle of wine that you set around too long, especially if it's not capped right, that wine will turn to vinegar, and you'll have grape vinegar, which isn't very tasty. It's still good for you, but that's the fermentation process. So we don't use distilled vinegar at all. And some will say, well, how much of the powdered dry vinegar should I give apple cider vinegar? I go, well, none, because that won't work either. That's dead. And why waste your money on a dead product? So it's not really apple cider vinegar. It's just dried something from fermenting apples, but don't use it. That's a real no-brainer for us. So as long as people are clear that, yeah, they all have mother, but that's not how we judge whether you should buy it or not. I guess that's the main thing, that people buy the right stuff and realize that Steve and I are out on this rabbit trail with vinegar. We just keep finding out I bet almost every day somebody calls me with a story about, wow, I started giving the vinegar and this happened, or I quit giving it and guess what? It's not working anymore. So we have collected, you might say, thousands of these stories about the use of it. And we learn something constantly about that we did not know it would do. So the advice I give people is you'd be crazy not to give apple cider vinegar if you have livestock of any species. And you'd also, the other thing I say to people, and I believe this is still true, I've been doing this for 40 years, I believe there's nothing else you can buy that pays you to give it. The ROI, the return on investment for vinegar, if you spend $1 for vinegar, you will get $2 to $3 back in improved performance. And certainly the livestock health is just a free bonus that comes with the casino. You know, you get all those health benefits for giving it, even though 90% of the people that give vinegar are doing it to make more money. They want more milk, more pounds of milk per day, which again is going to be higher on less feed. That's the amazing thing. Like with our stocker herd, we're feeding one whole bale less every time we fill them, and they're gaining another extra 2 pounds a day. So more meat and more fat on less feed. So again, nothing else does this. That's why we're prattling on and on about it, you know, because I can't believe not everybody's doing it. And our next frontier, I think, will be the feedlot cattle and the factory farmed livestock. Once they figure this out, they'll probably screw it up trying to do it cheaper or something. Which leads me to another thing is the biggest problem we've had is farmers hate shipping costs. They'd rather die than pay $10 to ship something. Am I right? I mean, I have farmers who get up before the sun comes up, get in their pickup and drive for hours, go load a ton of mineral and get a hernia doing it and get home after dark to save $100. And it's not logical, but it's just how it is. And even with the shipping being what it is, the most people pay for shipping is, the most I've ever heard of, is $2 a gallon. We have about 35 people that Steve has found to buy a truckload of vinegar, which is 18 totes of vinegar, 18 275-gallon totes. They're paying about 30 cents a gallon to have it shipped. That's all.
Mm.
But it's scary to people. They hate it. I get it. I mean, I understand why people don't want to pay a truck driver, but it makes sense to get the right stuff. And these 35 people are scattered across the United States. I bet when I talk to you next year, we'll have 100 people that buy a truckload at a time and divvy it up to their neighbors and their relatives and their friends or anybody else that shows up. So when somebody calls me and they're in Arkansas, I'll give them the guy's name in Arkansas that has it. Or if they're in New York or if they're in wherever they are, we have all these people sitting there with 18 totes of vinegar and they expect us to send them people, and it's a win-win. Everybody's winning from this. Steve is also going to give anybody that listens to Working Cows a Working Cow discount for the next 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, he'll give them a $50 bill for ordering a tote. So it's just kind of a little sweetener for it. He just told me that. So that's a Working Cow. We love working with you, Clay, and this podcast is you're saving lives. You're keeping people on farms. And as we know, farmers are an endangered species and they need to get all the help they can get. And everything you put out there is good. I've listened to pretty much all of your podcasts and it's amazing what you're doing. It's a great body of work. These are the people that we support each other.
Yep.
And none of us are in this for the money. If we were doing something for the money, I don't know about you, Clay, but there's a lot easier ways to make a living than working with animals and farmers. But it's in our blood, it's in our guts, it's in our pedigree, it's in our DNA. So
yep. I appreciate that. Have we kind of covered the A to Z or the A to V of apple cider vinegar, do you feel?
I think we covered everything I was going to talk about. I just made and I didn't cover cost. Cost is going to be it's about right now about 1,250, let's say, a tote for a big huge tote,
275-gallon tote.
Yeah, and if you need it certified, we have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get it certified. It's basically the same vinegar, but we have to get a brand new tote. We have to seal it. We have to certify it with an inspector. It has to be labeled, and they're about 18-20 a tote.
Wow.
So that's a monster. And it behooves everybody to figure out, maybe talk your neighbor into it, to get 2 totes, because we had a guy the other day that just ordered 2 totes, and he wanted only one. And it was only like $25 to get the second one to his farm because they're already driving out there. Yeah. They're a lot of these are smaller loads, and they're making their money on that first tote. So, and we don't anymore need to experiment. Like a lot of people want to stick their toe in the water. It's like, well, I'm going to get a 5-gallon bucket of it. Well, it's going to kill you. It's going to cost you more to ship it to you than the vinegar costs, So just everybody loves it. Nobody that starts vinegar gives up on it or quits. Almost unheard of, because almost everybody will see results within days. Especially if they watch things. We get our good data from dairy people because they have a yardstick in the bulk tank. Every day they know how many pounds of milk she made. They know what the butter fat was. They know what the somatic cell count was. They know all the components. So they touch their cows every day. They know whether they're slicked up and shiny and their ears are up and everything. A lot of ranchers, unfortunately, only see their cattle out the pickup window once a week or something like that. So they don't really know the pulse that dairy farmers use. And it's not that it's more sacred or anything, but our best grass-fed beef producers are former dairy people, because they know they know their cows. They touch them, they look at them, they can read them. And I like to have a scale on site if you can get one and find a used scale. That's how we really know what's going on. If we didn't have a scale at Thousand Hills, we wouldn't know we're making these 3 pounds a day. We might look at the calendar and say, oh my, they're ready to go to town. But having that scale is really a worthwhile investment for anybody with livestock.
Sure. Very good. Well, Will, it's always a pleasure. Likewise, appreciate the work that you guys are doing. So thank you so much for your time today and your kind words.
Well, very good. Keep up the great work, Clay. I really appreciate you. Yeah. And good luck to everybody out there. Let's make it work.
Very good stuff. As always with Will, he has a lot to say, and I really appreciate his ability to just articulate these things in a way that kind of shows how the practice can benefit you and your operation. And as he said there's a opportunity to get it for the next couple of weeks at a reduced price per tote. So if you're interested in that, you can go ahead and check out the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/413, and find links to where you can pick up your tote of apple cider vinegar. Next week on the podcast, excited to welcome back Brian Doherty from Understanding Ag, and we are going to talk to him about nutrient management. How do we make sure that we have the nutrients we need in the soil where we need it? And the conventional approach to this is the right time at the right rate in the right place, and there's maybe one more R. But he's going to run by us a different way of thinking about this, and I think it's a really helpful way of thinking about it. And so I look forward to sharing that with you coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.